Paris Live guest.
Now, a biennial World Trade Organization forum got underway in Geneva this week as US trade policies came under the spotlight, with the European Union, along with other members, stating that, I quote, "The multilateral trading system is in deep crisis and the USA is at its epicenter." Now, earlier today, the US ambassador, Dennis Shea, rejected those comments made by the EU on Monday and clashed, however, anew with China, with both Washington and Beijing accusing each other of undermining the World Trade Organization system. Now, today, I'm joined on the line by Arancha Gonzales, who's the Executive Director of the International Trade Center in Geneva. Arancha, it's great to have you on the programme again. So, on Monday, the EU hit out at the USA for being at the epicenter of a crisis within the WTO. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, first, David, let me explain what this event is. This is an event where every 2 years the trade policies of the United States, like those of the European Union, are reviewed, and members of the organization have an opportunity to tell the country that is being reviewed what they think of their trade policies. And I think it's fair to say that a number of countries this time around told the US that they were concerned by unilateral trade measures that the US have taken in this last year to fight what the US understands is unfair trade, but what the others understand needs to be settled through negotiations, like, for example, overcapacity in steel and aluminum, where the problem seems to be overcapacity in China, but the measures that the US took hit Europe, Mexico, Canada, India, Switzerland, Norway, and the list goes on. So they told the US, these countries told the US, we do not appreciate that for solving this matter, you should proceed with unilateral trade measures. And I think this is where they had a bit of a robust dialogue, let's say.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, let's have a look at the US-China relationship. Now, although a ceasefire was declared in, the trade war between the US and China, and that kind of ceasefire would say was declared in Argentina at the beginning of this month at the G20 meeting down there. But the rhetoric is still flying today, with the US claiming that China, for example, subsidizes and maintains excess capacity in multiple industries, forcing producers in other economies to shut down. And there are also cries of foul play and industrial espionage. Now, it appears that hostilities will resume if an agreement is reached, or is not reached, should I say, in US-Chinese trade talks that are taking place at the moment, and they are meant to come to fruition in March. Now, this is quite an ultimatum, and a lot is at stake here for two of the biggest powers in the world to really be at loggerheads. What can you give us any insider look at this? What exactly is being tabled at these talks, Arancha, and where is there any common ground or area for consensus between the two?
Look, first, there is clearly a problem. There is a problem on both sides. The U.S. accuses China of using unfair trading practices to gain a foothold on global trade, and the Chinese response saying that the U.S. also practices unfair trading practices on their side. I think what was important was the decision that was taken in Argentina a couple of weeks ago to deal with this through dialogue, through a negotiation, rather than through unilateral trade measures. And this is very important because markets had been telling both countries that they do not think unilateralism is going to resolve matters. What's worse, they thought that the instability and the lack of predictability created through unilateralism was going to harm the economies of both blocs. And what we saw is markets are not markets. Markets are businesses reacting to the behavior of these two big trading partners, saying, we are concerned that you are not capable of channeling your grievances through dialogue and a negotiation. And what's good is that they have now sat down. What's at stake is a number of first, respect or lack of respect for intellectual property rights, overcapacity in a number of sectors, subsidization on a number of sectors, whether it is industry, whether it's agriculture on one side, on the other side. But again, for me, the most important message, what I take is that the two countries understood they better sit down and find an agreement. And now they've given themselves 3 months to do that. I think there is no time to waste because a lot of these issues have systemic implications and it will not be enough for the two. to come to an agreement. It would require others to come to this agreement.
So exactly, it's kind of getting the two bad boys at the table to sit down and behave. And indeed, this brings me on to my next question. When we last spoke, Arancha, you did yourself underline that the WTO structures need to be reformed to become, well, applicable to 21st century trading practices. But with the US President Donald Trump's team refusing to allow new appointments to the appellate body. Now, that, in layman's terms, is really like the World Trade Organization's kind of court. Surely this kind of hindering of any this kind of obstruction or holding of things back is going to hinder any process of reform within the WTO.
Well, I think both China and the US, as well as other G20 members, 2 weeks ago at the G20 meeting in Buenos Aires, agreed that the way forward was to reform the organization, to reform the WTO. And this means reforming its dispute settlement system, basically reforming the way in which they settle disputes in what you've just called the court, inverted commas, reforming the negotiations in WTO, and reforming the surveillance system. Now, if they are serious about what they agreed in Buenos Aires, next stage should be to sit down and reform it. And surely there are issues that need to be improved in the dispute settlement of the WTO, if only to make it work faster, because businesses expect faster decisions addressing their concerns. But I don't think that the way forward is just simply to sit tight and not move forward. There has to be now an engagement in a real negotiation to reform.
Now, bringing me on to the next question, indeed, I mean, it looks like everything is kind of becoming slowly but surely just atrophied. And China has accused the US of paralyzing the World Trade Organization. And indeed, the US has called on Washington to engage in talks on reform proposals that were presented last month, as you said, I think it was before Argentina. But can you just give us an outline about what these proposals that have been put on the table actually are?
Well, it's very interesting to see that the EU has been working with the US and Japan to put proposals on the table, proposals that address overcapacity, proposals that address subsidization or more favorable treatment given to certain state-owned enterprises, reforms with the manner in which the surveillance function of the WTO would work. At the same time, Europe is also working with China to come forward with proposals to reform the manner in which the WTO works, to reform the manner in which the dispute settlement works. All of this is basically food starting fuel to start these reform negotiations. What is important now is to move beyond words and rhetoric, move beyond declarations to actually sitting down and starting the negotiations. And believe me, these negotiations will take time, and these negotiations will need to involve not just the US and China and the EU and Japan. It will need to involve, because they are multilateral, the 160 members of the World Trade Organization. So as far as I'm concerned, the sooner the better.
Okay, Arancha, we're going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme here on Paris Live today. That was Arancha Gonzales, who's the Executive Director of the International Trade Centre, speaking to us there from Geneva.